Hello and good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the Chapter Relations Frameworks to Improve Engagement and Growth event. I'm Patrick Shanahan, Enterprise Sales Manager with GlueUp, and with us today are two very special guest panelists. We've got George Reers, a consultant of project management and a fractional chief information officer at the award-winning A-Church Consulting, as well as Julie LaRose, who's the Senior Vice President of Membership and State Association Management at the Self Storage Association. With me, as always, is my CEO and founder of GlueUp, Eric Schmidt. They'll be discussing chapter relations frameworks in associations and offer some tips to improve the process and share their experiences. Over the last several years, we've developed and been in deep discussions with many chapter-based associations and other organizations. And this is what we saw. We noticed that data, communications, financial ties, brandings, program consistency gaps, and manual processes across the hierarchy of many chapter-based organizations have been very difficult to deal with in the past traditionally, especially when it comes to technology. And we have hopefully addressed that with our platform. So we've decided to take our chapter management and AMS cloud and develop that. But we're doing an event series this year, which is really tailored towards continuing to hone in on what's valuable in terms of the insights from people who are working in chapter-based organizations and of all different types and structures, and to see what we can solve for that. So let's just jump right into our discussion. This will go over to you, Eric.
Great, thank you, Pat, and welcome everybody. We are pleased to be running this event today. We have, as Pat said, both Julie and Greg joining us this afternoon. It is afternoon here in the Washington, D.C. area, so welcome anybody on the West Coast. I know we have a few people joining from Europe, so appreciate everybody joining us today. So if I guess Julie and George, if you guys want to pop on, we will go ahead and get started. But as was mentioned, for everybody, my name is Eric Schmidt. I am the CEO and co-founder here at GlueUp. We are based out of Tysons / McLean, depending on what wording people use. It seems to change all the time what the definition of the city is, but we are based outside of Washington, D.C. and Virginia. And of course, we are happy to be working with everybody across the chapter world and continuing to work with more and more chapter organizations, as we understand there are quite a few challenges within the chapter space and the association world that we come across in speaking with our clients on a regular basis. So as Pat mentioned, we started this series to really, help share that information. Again, it's a little bit different, we understand, than what a traditional association is doing in terms of how they're working both with the volunteers, working at both the chapter level as well as at the national level or global level, depending on how far the reach goes of the organization. So today, as Pat mentioned, we have both Julie and George joining us with different backgrounds and different experiences as it relates to chapters. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little bit more so you understand, one, the organization that they work with, and two, some of their experience in working with chapter organizations. So Julie, we will start with you, if you don't mind just giving a quick background on yourself and of course your great organization.
Great. So I came to the Self Storage Association after a few decades in elite private school in the Metro Washington, D.C. and New York City areas as a teacher, administrator, and then founded a school here in Northern Virginia, and came to the Self Storage Association where we have an interesting chapter model that is pretty untraditional. We actually don't have chapters per se, but we call them chartered associations, which are at a state level that are entities of the Self Storage Association. We actually third-party manage states that hire us to manage their state associations. And then we have an affiliate component under our umbrella that their state associations are independent, but they still pay us a fee to access our magazine and come to our events. And we're the only trade association in the self-storage space.
Great. And maybe if you don't, if you want to mention, if you can, the kind of growth you guys are experiencing. I think everybody who lives anywhere in the United States is seeing self-storage pop up, everywhere. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that too.
It is. I think the challenges and successes we have as the self-storage associations are directly reflective of our industry. I feel like year over year, the industry says they've had the best year yet, and you're exactly right. Everywhere you look, they're popping up on every corner. And it's pretty unique to America, although it is international. Americans are people who are in transition and life's events, as well as businesses, small businesses. So there's a huge need in our society for self-storage.
Great. And George, welcome.
Great. Hey there. My name is George Rears. I work for A Church Consulting, fractional CIO and PM work. And prior to that, I served as a VP of Technology Solutions for an association management company, which has given me a lot of exposure to the different experiences both headquarters and chapters organizations have with their interactions, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I've got a lot of experience navigating those waters, trying to come up with solutions that benefit everybody. Likewise, I'm also very involved in a local chapter-based association called the Society for Information Management. I serve on their executive board. So professionally, oftentimes I'm associated with the headquarters, but then as a volunteer, I'm on the chapter side. So I get to see both sides. It's an excellent relationship, but at times it does get frustrating, and you get to see how to make this relationship work, which I think is the essence of chapter management governance.
Yeah, so let's jump into that relationship since you mentioned it. Obviously there are quite a few challenges, both at the national level as well as at the local level. Part of that being, everybody thinks that they know best, right? You're the volunteer, you're doing this as a volunteer unpaid. Hey, this is how I want to do it. This is how you should be doing it, and vice versa. Talk a little bit about that, and how you have seen both sides, from both your professional experience as well as your volunteer experience.
Sure, and you're right. That's the crux of it, isn't it? Because the volunteers, we know it, we experience it, we love it. Whereas on the staff side, we're the professionals. We see it from multi dimensions. We're experts. We've studied it. We've lived through it from the other side. And what it comes down to is I'm an IT professional, but it's not the technology. It's the people. It really comes down to people. I'll probably say that 5 times before this call's over. So warning, spoiler alert. But really, that is the issue, is how do you create that structure that allows that communication to happen many times before frustration creeps in. And one of the things I like to do, especially because IT, I'm in many ways a gatekeeper to something everybody wants, which is data. And that information that you can share is something that both sides always agree on. Everybody wants access to that information. Everybody wants to be able to use that information. Everybody wants, and it benefits everybody when they have access to that information. When chapters can make better decisions, when chapters know their information, their members get a better experience, which benefits a national organization, the headquarter organization. So in many ways, when I start to see that friction, I try and focus on areas where the chapter and the headquarters organization can agree. And that's usually member engagement, it's on data sharing, and it's on membership growth. And we try to focus on those areas where there is almost unanimous opinion on, let's make this happen. The details, though, the how is where people start to diverge.
Absolutely. Julie, and I guess maybe you want to talk a little bit about how you see things, both between, what you guys are doing and as well how you are interacting with the chapters and some of the challenges that you guys have experienced over the years.
We do. Here at the Self Storage Association, we actually manage the operations, websites, communication, marketing, event planning, finance, governance, board relations, all of that from national. So although taxing for our team. And I agree with you, George. It's all about people. The people who work here, I consider them Renaissance employees and teammates. They can do a little bit of everything. They're not specialists in any one thing necessarily, which fits our model because they're event planners. They can manage a board. They can interpret bylaws. They can testify in legislation. They can do it all. So that's to our advantage that we have here. By directing the operations and the management at the national level, funneling down to the state level, it provides a really consistent line of communication all across the country. And then also we're very knowledgeable in every single market because we're in every single market. We're traveling on the road, every single week, interacting with our members, connecting our members. So for us here at the Self-Storage Association, it's more of the national funneling down to the state level. But in turn, our laws are made at the state level. So we rely on our members, our advisory board of directors, to be the experts in the field in specific states and on the local level. So that's sort of where that funnel returns, is they're providing us with information, data, legislative connections, so we can be successful in the legislative wins across the country.
Okay, so for you guys, really the folks at that level are more focused on making sure they have the pulse of what's going on from a legislative standpoint, as opposed to doing, some of the things that in other organizations, volunteers might be tasked with doing with local events and some of those aspects.
We do. We leverage our volunteers and our board of directors by being experts on what challenges they may be facing to operate their facilities at the state level. We also provide them with e-membership materials so that because they are networking with new people coming into our space, because there's new facilities all the time. So we really charge them with the responsibility of spreading membership information, getting their competitor and their colleagues to attend our events, and putting as many people in the fold as we possibly can. Organically, our industry is really transparent and really friendly. So they don't view the 3 facilities that are on every corner as competitors. They view them as you need to be involved in this association, because if you're not operating legally and you get sued, it's going to ruin it for everyone.
Very interesting. And I guess from your standpoint, for your association, what do you see as the biggest challenge, obviously, with that growth and everything you guys are trying to accomplish?
So our biggest challenge here is what I would call scalability. Because as we're taking on entire states, and that especially in the state management, we're not taking on 20 members a month, 50 members a month. We might be taking on hundreds of members and thousands of facilities at a time. So whenever we think, to George, I'm listening to you, whenever we think we have the technology figured out, our operations figured out, when you're, onboarding, potentially 3,000 or 4,000 facilities, now what used to work doesn't work. And we're adding those states very often. When I started here, we only had 14 and now we're up to 21.
That's great. So George, before, the call, we talked a little bit about the chapter relations framework and some of its different aspects. What do you see, what does that mean? And what do you see, some of the things that are essential to making that relationship work?
I view it basically as the guidelines, the road work to making the necessary communication happen. The chapters are all very different, and I'm sure Julie has this. You've got small chapters, you got large chapters, you've got chapters that are really, each all might have their own mission. Some might be more social and networking. Some might have more of an active legislative cause and thing that they're trying to lobby for, and some of them just might be education focused, and even though the national has its own mission, the chapters all exist for their own needs of their local members. And at the end of the day, the governance framework is what allows that communication and that common language between the parental or the headquarters organization, the chapter organization, and allows you to have the difficult conversation. Very often you've got, I found in chapters, they're very often personality driven. And what you've got is you've got a person there who's been a leader for years, whereas you're more often than not, and you have with your headquarters organizations, you've got a whole full succession plan in place, and you've got transition plans. And it's how do we bring, in many ways, these chapters leaders into that fold? How do we bring them in and get how do we get their concerns held at that national level? And that's what the framework allows, that communication upward, and also allows from the other side, it's a commitment to the chapters that you're going to give them the resources they need from the headquarters organization, whether it's data, whether it's financial support, whether it's staff support. There's all these things that the headquarters can provide the chapters that when you set out, like anything else, you want to meet the expectations up front. And that's what the framework does, is it allows you to have the rules of the road in front of you. You know what to expect, and there's less missed expectations.
Julie, you want to add into, I guess, how you see that working with your organization?
George is exactly right. Every state or charter or affiliate that we manage, they're all different. And I think our advantage is we have someone on staff on my team who's an expert in board relations. So we're conducting hundreds of board calls every single year because we respect that they are the expert in their state and their municipality. They're telling us what they need, and we listen and we provide that for them because, to George's point, we're the National Association. So we have a lot of assets, a lot of resources. And the same person who is planning the education for our national event is the same person who's planning the educational content in Indiana and Kentucky and Florida and Oregon. So she's an expert. So we definitely listen, very, very much so, and we deliver to whatever their needs may be across the country, and it allows us to be experts in every market.
Yeah, something else I think that both of you sort of alluding to is every chapter is different and their needs are different. How do you make sure you're tailoring what the needs are of that local organization without being too prescriptive that this is the one thing we're doing across every chapter, regardless of how you guys operate? How are you managing that?
Go ahead, George.
As I say, one of the neat things, one of the organizations I work with well, and it's actually the exact opposite, Eric, is they provide full transparency of membership activity via a statistical dashboard to their chapters. So that not only do they see the engagement level of what their members are doing in their local chapter, they can see the engagement levels of other chapters and what programs are working for them. So in this case, they're not necessarily customizing the data to that chapter, but they're giving them that broad view to help them inspire to do different things. In this case, this particular group is a networking group. They focus on networking events to build relationships and build peers inside the real estate arena. So what you find out is all of a sudden your golf events are dropping, but then you see a chapter 3 states over is really having a lot of success with happy hours. You can start to build your own chapter plans around what's working in other places. So not discounting what you said, but I just find that fascinating how by sharing all that data, even if it's not that chapter's data, all the chapters can benefit. And then to build on Julie's point, the expertise you have at the association level, we talk about how the chapter volunteers often feel like they know more, and in many cases they do. But when you get to somebody who is a professional, who is an expert in the field at the association level, when you can make those connections and you can make those personal connections, whether it is either a conference call or whether it's a webinar where you're talking to the leader in that field, that is where you can start customizing your engagement based upon what that chapter's specific focus and interests are.
Julie?
Yeah, and I think for us, you know, we do sort of, in a way, we do membership sharing. I have a board meeting this afternoon with Virginia, so we'll certainly give them a status update and a history update of where they are in their membership numbers. Who is not a member, who hasn't renewed, can you please reach out? You know, so they are very active, and we give them that information. And by that partnership, you know, they can sell memberships way easier than we can. And they can demonstrate the value they see in our association to their competitor, their colleagues, somebody who hasn't renewed, more than we can. So we do leverage our volunteers in that way and find them very, very effective. We've had states that have doubled their membership, you know, by 100 or 150 members a year, just by establishing membership committees within our volunteers and have them do the work for us. You know, they can go on and join. That's the easy part. We make that easy to join the association. But what we offer each state, regardless if it's a larger state like Florida or one like Vermont, they're treated the same. They're given an annual meeting because they tell us what their needs are. We tailor their needs as far as educational content to them. We do get laws passed, which are different in every single state. So there's always a legal and legislative component to our events. But we don't necessarily do what George does, in the fact that we host different golf outings or different things for them. Within the national subset, we sort of group those people together based on where they are in the industry. So we have a young leaders group for people that are under 40. We have a large operators council. We have a women's council, diversity inclusion council. So our members can definitely connect and engage with the association at the local, state, national level, and then whatever subset applies to them also within the industry and their career path.
Great. Maybe you want to dig into a little bit talking about the membership committee and how you guys define their role. Obviously, it's important to the success of the organization and that member engagement aspect of, you know, what you're hoping to achieve. But, you know, maybe some guidelines or, you know, sort of SOPs, if you will, that you've set up for them to be successful.
We do. And, you know, George has mentioned this many times. It's about the people, and we put in the time. So we will get on a call with the membership committee. We'll get our membership team on the call. We'll provide them, be very transparent with their data, what members they currently have, what members have not renewed, what members might be out there in the market for them to go after. And then, just like we would with our employees, we hold them accountable. So we might follow up with them in 2 weeks. And say, how have you done? This is what numbers we're seeing. We provide them with an e-toolkit that has membership materials in there, so they can provide that to new contacts within the industry. And we have found that to be really effective for sure in our membership growth, and most also equally in membership retention.
I want to
go ahead,
I can
George.
jump in there because I want to share a
Yeah.
model that I've seen a few times, and it's actually not a successful model, where I've seen some people staff their membership committee completely out of their board and national members, or the members that have the greater relationship on the national side, and then they're not getting that input from their chapter groups. Now, I'm not saying that your membership committee should be completely chapter focused, but it's got to have that voice in there. And that goes across for everything. One organization that I'm working with is very effectively merges the two, so that your programming committee has components of both your national volunteers versus your chapter-based volunteers. And that cross-pollination, one, helps you program better or develop member benefits better, but it also builds that relationship piece between the two, and it also helps in many cases with your succession and your step of getting your volunteers through the progression ladder of engagement. Many of the groups I'm in, typically you get active at the chapter level, go through chapter leadership, which leads to more of national piece. But you've got to have that. You've got to have that ladder. You've got to have that progression visible.
Great, and just as a note, I do encourage anybody who has questions throughout this whole entire time, please send them in. We'll get them answered. There is a question we have for you, Julie. What assets are provided as part of your e-membership toolkit?
Yeah, so we had our marketing team just design a simple two-sided e-document. QR code that goes to member benefits, just a basic testimonial of somebody that's a larger operator in their state, so probably a recognizable figure or company. A QR code that goes directly to the join application. Some of the highlights that we are not for profit, we get lien laws passed, we're your only association in the space. And then for our more seasoned members, which we have a lot of them, we put a paper application on the back. So nothing, no crazy bells and whistles, but it's literally just a two-sided flyer, easy to send, easy for our state volunteers to pass that out. You know, they can either mail it in or they can join online. And then, you know, we don't generally list like all these benefits because we know customers and ourselves don't read a lot. So we just try to highlight 3 or 4 things that basically, to be successful in the self-storage space, I need access to those 3 or 4 things. And, you know, we just find by that simple, effective, direct messaging that we have great conversion from memberships. And again, we're not selling it. We're leaving that to the brokers on the ground that are meeting new people buying and selling facilities, and our volunteers at the state level.
That's great. I guess let's move on to, you know, another aspect of this, and George, you touched a little on this, you know, is the role of technology. You know, it obviously in some cases can be beneficial. Some, you know, for some folks, it might be a little bit too much. But George, so you're the expert here, you know, tell us a little bit about what you've seen being effective and where it starts to, you know, be a little bit too much for maybe some of the volunteers dealing with too much information, but at the same time, how national is benefiting, you know, from understanding what's going on in that engagement within the data.
And this is really where governance comes in, and also the different cultures between different chapters. Your larger chapters might have their own staff people, part-time, somebody who will do event setup, will do even membership processing. They need access to data, they need access to systems very similar to the national organization. But now you've added risk into this because this person is not necessarily even an employee of the National Association, but yet they need access to this information. Likewise, unlike the national, where you pretty much have a lot of the staff work doing most of the work, when you get down to the chapter, a lot of times it's volunteer driven, volunteer run, volunteer actually does the work and does the setup. So the question is, and the dilemma often is, you know, how do you accommodate this different needs? Do you do a separate system? They have their own separate database that you do extracts in to then send it up to headquarters? Do you have one system that everybody does? Now, if you do that one system that everybody has access to, how do you control it and give access? So you have the roles and responsibilities. And that's not even a technical issue sometimes, it's just as much as it's a decision-making hierarchy. And then you've got, on top of that, your staff people, they're full-time employees, they're trained, you know how they work the system. Your volunteers come and go. You know, they're here, they have a bad meeting, they leave, they might still have access. How do you track all this stuff? It adds a layer of complexity, but yet you need to do it to make the chapters successful. They have to have access to these systems. You don't want to slow them down. You want to give them the ability to do their self-setup, their own maintenance. Once again, having those rules, the roads established, and making that joint discussion, the joint decisions early enough, it's key to the understanding, because that's where a lot of friction can develop.
Julie, would you like to add?
So here at the Self-Storage Association, we actually handle everything. So we handle all the invoicing, we handle all the payments. We manage about 25 websites. Everything funnels through the national database, our AMS, which is great because, you know, we're capturing engagement, we're capturing new prospective members, and everything runs through our national database. So although it makes for a heavy workload here, we just find it, you know, that the data that we have and controlling it all here eliminates a lot of what George was saying as far as giving people access. You know, I always say when you go into a fast food restaurant and you go, you know, to a state, you know, another state, they're the same. And that's sort of what our associations, chapters, states look like. All the websites are very similar. And we do all of that in-house here.
And Julie, I guess let's talk a little bit on that same, you know, element of, as you look at your organizational structure, how are you structuring the organization to make sure that you're providing each of those chapters with what they need, but you're also making sure National is taking care of everything it needs at the national level? The question that did come in related to that is how many staff do you see on a national level should be dedicated to chapter relations? For example, if you have an association that has 300 chapters, would you have one full-time employee per 100 to ensure quality support? How do you think about that, and what is the structure that you guys think is successful?
So surprisingly, here at the SSA, we have a really small staff. So I only have a team of 6 that manages all of this. And I oversee all of our membership at the state, national, affiliate level, and then all of the management of the 21 state associations. So within that structure, again, I consider our team to be very Renaissance. So we sort of all do everything, including myself. So my colleague Leslie in Florida wears multiple hats. She's an event planner. She's the executive director in Florida. So she's managing that state association. She's also my board relations expert, and she completely manages board relations for 21 associations. She sets up the meetings, works with our legal team on bylaws, changing those to fit the governance of each state, however they would like. So we have a little bit of a different internal model in that sense too. Even myself as the senior vice president, I handle almost all of our states on the East Coast. So, you know, I'm doing event planning, I'm changing rooms, but also at the same time, I'm sort of the marketing and communications person for the department. So we have a really small staff, and within that staff, they do manage certain areas of the country. So not one person is the chapter relations person. I have 4 across the country managing states and chapters in their geographic area, but within staffing, everyone has an area of expertise. My colleague Erin sits in Los Angeles, and she handles all of our vendors and sponsors in addition to our western states west of the Mississippi. But it's all about people, like George said. Not everyone can do that.
No. George, what have you seen?
I'm sorry, I got caught up with Julie's in relation to.
Yeah, so organizational structure and how to make sure
Yeah,
national.
I mean, yeah, so I'm much more broad. So the model that George likes is Julie's model. And it simplifies everything. And I've seen a lot of organizations treated almost as an association management company. So they will manage for the chapter, and then they'll charge them a fee for doing that. They'll handle all their events, all their other ones. The one that's more of the struggle is the one I alluded to earlier, and that's the one where each association volunteer run. They bring in their own staff person to do work. However, there are advantages to that as far as engagement. You know, when you're locally led, you get more of that local flavor. It's a balance. I'm currently a member of an organization that fits that latter group, which we're locally led. We have our own staff, And I just see the frustrations we'll have a lot of time just sharing data with the headquarters organization. Whereas some of the ones I'm working with professionally, where we've got that AMC model similar to Julie's, the friction goes down because the communication is there, the professional staff is working on everything. And the same person is working across chapters, so there's a consistency. The data looks the same, there's less issues, less bugs. But on the other side, sometimes and sometimes chapters may feel they're getting a cookie cutter experience.
I guess following on, this is Christopher Leach has 2 questions. We're going to start with the second one here. Do local leaders sign any kind of agreement with the national organization when they're elected or appointed to be local chapter leaders? How are expectations stated and managed? Great question.
That should be part of our new best practices. I've never seen it happen, to be honest with you. I see them sign on. They get on the bank card for the local bank. They sign all the paperwork for the local chapter, and maybe there's an introductory call with the national level. But I very rarely, if ever, have seen somebody actually sign a memorandum of understanding of the relationship. I think that's a brilliant idea.
I agree, George. I wouldn't say that's something we're consistent with on the state management side. Currently, we have 2 states that do sign agreements, conflict of interest forms, because again, we're sharing data. There's nothing more than a broker wouldn't love is for new contacts. So, we have to protect our data. Our data is proprietary to the Self-Storage Association. So, yes, but not across the board. Great question.
Yeah, and again, data is essential. You got to protect the data if you're not. I've seen some organizations where even within a technology platform, they're giving everybody admin level access, which means anybody, including interns, can be downloading data from the platform. That is not a safe way to run any organization. No matter how uncomfortable people feel with technology, it is extremely important that people have the right roles and permissions set up to make sure that the data of the association is protected at all levels. Chapter finances, another fun topic. Maybe Julie, for you, it's a little bit easier, but what we've seen is, many organizations struggle with this. Some people are collecting dues at a local level and have to transfer them up. Some, collect a portion or all dues at the national level and need to transfer it down. I don't know that there's a good model to this. The key thing is having a solid way to do, maintain chapter finances, especially if they have local entities. Julie, maybe you can talk a little bit about, obviously you guys have a different model here, but how are you guys managing that with maybe different legal entities across the board?
We do. So we actually only have 2 people in finance, our CFO and Joan, our manager, and they manage all of our finances. All of our finances for the National Association, our affiliates, our chapters, and our third-party managed states. What also is interesting at the SSA is that national dues is separate from state dues or chapter dues. So it's very possible that somebody's paying a chapter dues and they're paying a national dues, and those are 2 separate things. Our chapters, like I said, are entities of the SSA, so that those finances go directly into our national accounts. And then our third-party managed states are all independent finances that they have to manage. So again, a little bit more work for us and our staff, but we're controlling all the money that's coming in, all the money that's going out, and the real-time balance sheets and investments too. I mean, to George's point, some of our state associations are so large, they have investments and investment plans, but our CFO is handling all of that for them on their behalf with their decision-making.
The model I've seen, the most frequent is the headquarters collecting the membership dues and then allocating it back out on whatever the appropriate percentage is to the chapter. And usually that's done with a fee of, let's say, the membership for the the national is 100, and then the chapter fee is 25. And I've seen it work pretty well, sometimes even when you have an environment where different chapters have different rates. So I belong to a Philadelphia chapter for the Society of Information Management. We are more expensive than other ones. And yet, even though on the national side, if you come in, it's pretty clear that we're more expensive, it still works. The time where that gets into being a challenge is when you, as a headquarters organization, want to do something like if you join your first chapter, you get your second chapter half off. It's a universal problem, because which chapter is first, which one's second, which one is getting shorted? Do you short both of them? And once again, that's where, you know, having your governance and your plan and your communication set up is very effective. One of the issues where you have people join at the chapter level, it does make it harder for the people to join multiple chapters, because you've got to have these organizations that don't necessarily have a lot of budget, have a system that not only accommodates people joining their organization, but potentially only paying their chapter fee and not the chapter and national, which just starts complicating it for the smaller organizations. So most of the time, I see the model where people are paying the headquarters, and then there's usually a monthly true up where the money is transferred down from the national into the bank account of the local chapter, or in the cases where the chapters are really running self-budget, self-governing, if you will.
So Christopher has a related question to this, so we're going to go into that. Are there separate benefits for being a dues paying member, national member, versus being a dues paying state member? Are they seen as two different organizations? I think, Julie, that relates a little bit to what you were talking about.
Yes, for us it is. And we actually have different member benefits depending on whether you're a national member or a state member. So, you know, and I think that's what really determines is their access to information, because we are the only trade association in the space. If you're a larger operator, you're more likely going to need access to legal, legislative, lien law related things in multiple states. So being a national member is probably better. However, at the state level, if you're an operator just in one state, then a state membership would make sense for you. But also, the laws are passed at a state level. So sometimes our members prefer to be members of both because they get more information as a state member about lien laws than perhaps on a Monday email where we're, you know, communicating to our members our legislative successes all across the country. So we provide things like checklists, lien law books at the state level, which drives our state membership. Certainly, whereas at the national level, they're getting more robust things like a legal network, access to our national events and things of that nature.
So do they have to be part of national in order to join the state?
Nope, they're two completely separate memberships.
Not
So,
related to each other. Okay, interesting.
it is interesting.
Again, related to that, are they 501c6s or 501c3s at the chapters?
For us, again, like I was saying, at the charter level, they are entities of our national association. So, and then the other third-party managed ones, you know, they are their own managed state. So we're just their management company. So we don't have, you know, sort of the chapter part that George may have. They're entities of ours, National Association.
George, any distinction you want to make between those two for folks?
Between the two tax statuses, I am not an accountant. I don't play one on TV. But usually from my perspective, it doesn't play in the tax status. So I can't answer.
And George, I couldn't answer either.
We'll leave that for a different discussion. All right. We've got a lot of great questions. So, again, as folks are putting them in here, again,
I
we
can-
cannot
I
get
can
to
take-
all of them. Go ahead, George.
I'll
do you-
take Bruce Mulholland asked about
Okay.
local chapters being their own legal entities, where they have their own bylaws and submit their own taxes. Every organization I've been involved with, that has been the case for the chapters, that they've got their own legal entity, their own bylaws, they have their own tax. They have to do all that work on their own. And that is where an opportunity for the national chapter to support them, and provide services, everything from tax help to financial help. Usually they have their own separate financial committee, and they are in direct contact with accountants from the national chapter to make sure funds get transferred and are managed locally. So that has almost always been the case in mine. I know Julie is different, Julie, so
I'm sorry, George, could you repeat that?
I was turning it over to you. I was just saying that Julie, you're probably different because you're actually running the show for them. So it's slightly different, but
I was actually going to take Aubrey's question. So,
Yeah, go ahead. So let me
yeah.
just make sure I repeat that. So everybody, I don't know if everybody can see the questions, but let me just put it out there and then you can go ahead and answer it just so everybody has it. How does that, because again, going back to one of Julie's questions earlier on, she was talking about the roles of staff and how they are wearing multiple hats. Obviously they're busy folks and they're very good at what they do. So the question is how does all of that responsibility put on one staff person affect their well-being, work performance? There's a trend I've seen in nonprofit associations where one person has a million tasks. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, even though the person may have the capability to do them all. So go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, so with our exponential growth, we a previous management model we had is basically, one staff member owned a task from A to Z. And now we're really more like project managers. So I can take, for example, maybe the best example is hosting an event. So I'm hosting an event at the Gaylord in May, but I'm not doing all the work. All I'm doing is the marketing piece, the communications piece, and some event planning. I have another staff member that's completely taking care of our marketing team, completely takes care of any kind of programs, any signage, things of that nature, social media, geofencing, things like that. My colleague out in California handles all the sponsors and exhibitors. I'm not bothered with that. My colleague, Ginny, is handling all of our education, speakers, hotels, and I'm just the manager that's managing all of those components by hosting internal meetings, huddle calls, so we can deliver that project on time. So that's just sort of more of a project management model that we use here.
Right. This one goes back to when we were talking about chapters and leadership. Do you set term start end dates, or do you allow your groups to self-govern? If not, how do you support groups who onboard during various times of the year?
I'll take that one. And then the reality is many of the chapters came in and had their own beliefs, their own structures, and you can't really go upstream, swim upstream against that. But what you can do is often you can identify when you start a new chapter, the best practices for them. And then you can set that up and give them suggested guidelines and cultivate that new group. I mean, since they are their own legal entity, although they're affiliated with us, they have the ability to change their bylaws, and often they do change their bylaws. So you can really only start from a starting point. So it's not as straightforward as just trying to give everybody the same set of bylaws. This is where that communication is so important. You really need to work with them to set up that initial piece and then keep that relationship strong. A lot of you really want to avoid, and this does happen, people building their fiefdoms, and it's like they're there forever, and they bounce in and out of the chair position, and it and sometimes it's good, a benevolent dictator is a good thing, but a dictator who is not, has the wrong motivations could be a bad thing. But no, there's really, in my experience, there's no real way to control it at that level. Once they've got their own legal structure, they're free to change it, modify it as they see fit.
I would agree, George. We see 8 different states with 8 different bylaws, which is why I have a teammate that's her area of expertise is board relations. She works with our in-house legal team. We are not afraid to change bylaws here. It affects, it helps everyone and helps them govern themselves and puts more decision-making to the board rather than an entire membership, for example. But George is right. I mean, once they have the bylaws, we have to follow them. We have to implement them. Our legal team does an evaluation about every other year or so of those bylaws, and will make recommendations for change. And then they're also here, when we have to interpret those bylaws. And some have term limits, some don't. Some can decide who is on the board and kick them off when they want. I mean, it sort of runs the spectrum, to George's point also.
In relation to changing bylaws, how difficult has it been when you've wanted to make updates, to the various bylaws?
It can be challenging, because a lot of them, almost all of them, require a vote of the membership. So we have found success here. Again, we have a staff member that's her area of expertise. She's generally working with the board to say, okay, we need 12 more votes to get this passed. Please reach out to the members if you haven't voted yourself. So there's definitely a lot of proactive, work going in to get the bylaws passed. And in each case, we've been successful in doing so.
And if you want to steer it, so if it's not just changing it, but you've got a specific way you want to direct it, you're back to that building that relationship piece, knowing who you're going to work with to try and lead that change. And you've also got to be very aware of that process inside the bylaws for the change. So you often have to be aware of the calendar. So there might only be several windows during the year that the bylaws can be approved at various different meetings where there's a certain attendance threshold. So like Julie said, she's got a person who can read into that and master it. Don't assume changing bylaws can happen like that, because it often can be a 6 to 9 month process.
Yes.
Absolutely. Another question. So again, going back to partly related to the leadership question, have you seen member engagement drop off with your chapters? Have you had a lack of interest with members also running for leadership within those chapters?
If this is a COVID question, which I think it might be, we have seen engagement change dramatically. I won't say drop, but change dramatically. In-person meetings, dinners have dropped. We're maybe at a third to a half of what we used to get in one of my in the organization I'm most aware of, the one where I'm serving as a volunteer, and I also have a staff role. Where we're seeing it change though is we have now breakfast and we have lunch Zoom meetings, and those have populated up, and those are the obvious ones. The only ones where we're seeing in-person ones spike up are smaller get-togethers as opposed to the big board meeting or the big we used to have a monthly 80-person meeting. Our monthly 80-person meeting is now around 30. But what we're having now is we're now having 10-person geographical happy hours. And that's taking a region, Philadelphia region, and the Philadelphia region will now be the Southern Jersey, the Bucks County. And then that's where you're getting the people. People want to interact in person on a smaller scale than the larger scale. And they're more than happy to participate on Zoom calls, whereas before we couldn't get anybody. It's just part of our DNA now to jump on these phone calls. And we've never before used to have successful morning events. But we now have a very successful 8 to 9 call, because a lot of people can put their time in, either if it's their work from home day, if they're a hybrid remote, or they can sit at the office the first hour and participate in this meeting and then go about their workday. So those are some of the ways our engagement has changed since COVID. As far as volunteers, I still think we have as many people who want to volunteer and get involved with leadership. The problem is cultivating them and identifying them, because you don't have those personal interactions. You all know in Zoom, when you go to a Zoom meeting, you don't have that small talk before, you don't have that small talk after, so you never get the chance to ask those questions to get to know people at that level of, hey, this person, would you be interested in volunteering or getting involved in leadership? So it's really hard cultivating people to get to that next step.
George, I agree with you from a leadership perspective. We have a lot of people, fortunately, who want to volunteer and they want to be in leadership roles. However, we are a trade association, so we do prefer the owner, the operators, rather than a vendor. Vendors are always eager to jump in and volunteer. So some of our bylaws are very specific about how many vendors can sit in a board and how many owners and operators. On our advisory boards, we generally we can control that at the national level, and generally we'll take an owner and an operator over a vendor and try to keep that vendor to only one or two, so we know that their interests are of the sector, not for their own. Our meetings, which isn't surprising, are sort of the opposite of what George's experience was, and really it's the nature of the success of our and growth of our industry. Our members did not like online meetings at all. They didn't like it during COVID, and they still don't like it. And actually, we don't do any of it. We have sort of self-guided education for our managers because they are on site generally, and it's a little harder for them to get out of the office, especially with the current climate of HR and hiring employees. So we do tailor the content for that sector of our membership. But we've actually added 15 state events. So we now host over 30 across the country, and we host 5 national events across the country. And whenever I think we're going to have 300, we end up with 550. Whenever I think we have 4, we're going to end up with 700 or 800. And again, I think that's to the organic nature of our industry. It's a growing industry. And also we're the only trade association that can be that communicator of education, news, and information.
That's great. All right, well, I see Pat is back. So that means that we are about to hit the 1 o'clock hour here on the East Coast. So I want to thank you, Julie, and you, George, for participating today. Your comments are much appreciated, and certainly your participation. I hope everybody enjoyed the discussion. Lots of great questions. I want to thank the audience for the really intelligent questions that they were asking today. This has definitely been a very fruitful event, I hope, and I'll hand it back over to you, Pat.
Thanks, Eric. And thanks, Julie and George. Special thanks to you for sure, as well as the attendees. Some of these key insights, just guidelines, paving roadways to having consistent communication, a good governance framework, many other things. I think this could kind of be the spawn of some topics for some other events, as well as some of the questions we had. So thanks for that. And as we're building this network of experts, if you'd like to participate in a future event as a speaker, share some insights on your experience, just feel free to reach out. We're committed to solving problems of chapter-based organizations, and we'd like to learn as much as we possibly can about all these experiences. So, we do have a unique platform. Feel free to reach out, check us out on our blog, check us out on the website, and we'll also be sending a follow-up email to the attendees just with the online link for this. And of course, I'll send a thank you to you as well, so we can engage on that platform. So thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, George. Bye-bye, everybody.